All right, welcome and thank you for joining us today for using SD elements to comply with U.S. Executive Order 1428 Secure Development Software Recommendations. Few software development lifecycle models explicitly address software security in detail. As a result, secure software development practices usually need to be added in. Approaches can vary widely across development teams, leading to confusing and inconsistent secure software development practices. To address this issue, in February of 2022, NIST published the final version of Special Publication 800-2018, Secure Software Development Framework, often referred to as SSDF, version 1.1, which provides recommendations for mitigating the risk of software vulnerabilities. This framework provides a core set of high-level secure software development practices, and following these practices will help software producers reduce the number of vulnerabilities in released software, mitigate the potential impact of the exploitation of undetected or unaddressed vulnerabilities, as well as assess the root causes of vulnerabilities to prevent future recurrences. But as we begin today, we'll cover just a little bit of housekeeping. So first, you'll receive an email with the link to the recording of this webinar after today's event. We will also publish the recording in the resources section of the Security Compass website. In addition, please ask questions. To ask a question, type your question in the Q&A box and we'll address any questions you may have during the Q&A session at the end. And finally, if you have a topic you'd like to see us cover in a future webinar, please send us an email with your suggestion at contact@securitycompass.com. So next up, we'll talk through our agenda here for just a minute. So during our time today, we are going to learn more about Executive Order 1428 timelines and how the executive order impacts both application security and software development teams. We'll explore the relationship between the clauses in the executive order and the Secure Software Development Framework, or SSDF, and the recommendations it makes. And then we'll also see how SD elements can help you efficiently demonstrate your compliance with key SSDF recommendations. And then finally, by the end of the webinar, you'll be able to assess where you are today in terms of your compliance with the executive order, as well as where you need to get to by May 2022, which is actually just a few short months away. So joining us today, we're very pleased to have Jay Ryan, who is our U.S. federal government program manager at Security Compass. And Jay is an avid technologist with nearly 20 years of experience in leading operations for the federal and commercial security community. Jay's developed and led programs for commercial companies, as well as multiple commands within the Department of Defense and other agencies within the U.S. intelligence community. And he's had a focus on IoT and C5ISR solutions. Here at Security Compass, Jay leads a cross-functional federal team focused on growing adoption of SD elements within the U.S. Department of Defense, as well as within other U.S. federal government agencies. Also joining Jay today is Joseph Rowe, our U.S. federal government solution engineer here at Security Compass. Joseph is an Army veteran who served with the 32nd Signal Battalion in Darmstadt, Germany. And after finishing his enlistment, Joseph worked in the insurance field for a number of years while also completing his bachelor's of business computer information systems from the University of North Texas. And Joseph has previously worked as both a sales engineer and a sales engineering manager in the API management field. And here at Security Compass, currently Joseph is a solution engineer. He supports SD elements with a particular focus on the U.S. federal government segment. So now with these introductions out of the way, I'll turn things over to Jay, and Jay will begin the discussion.
Well, good afternoon, Maureen. Thank you for the introduction. Appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to everyone today. I am the pregame, but Joseph is certainly the main event, so I will move through my portion here, and we'll get to what everybody I think is here to see, and that's SD elements. But we're gonna have a great conversation today. We always want to tackle up front what's in this for you, and today we're going to cover a few of the less covered EO 14028 requirements. You know, everyone else has kind of beat up zero trust and SBOM, and those are incredibly important as a focus, but that's kind of another conversation. Today we're going to talk through kind of where you sit against the timeline and the benchmarks for the executive order, and then cover how the SSDF can help you with your own SDLC and reduction of software vulnerabilities, and kind of as was discussed in the agenda, follow on demo of SD elements with a conversation on how we can help you demonstrate your SSDF compliance. Next slide. So a little bit about us. SD Elements is a component of many U.S. federal and DoD software development pipelines, really for the purposes of building in compliance and shifting left. We're available at Platform One, Bespin, Kessel Run, and a number of those have attained CATO for their production pipelines using SD Elements to a large degree. And we're also available in Iron Bank for download community-wide and are expanding, for availability in Big Bang, where a lot of folks are going and developing their pipelines as well. Next slide. All right, the executive order. Let's get into today's conversation. But first, a quick poll. Oh, did you take the poll out, Maureen?
Oh, sorry, I jumped again there.
So for those of you online, we want to really know kind of real quick, get a pulse. How familiar are you with the executive order 14028? I imagine a number of you have read extensively on that. I'll give you 2 seconds here to opine. Da, da, da. We need the Jeopardy music going along while we do this. Want me to keep rolling, Maureen, or are we going to close it out a little early?
Yeah, I think let's go ahead and share the results of the poll and see what folks have input. Oh, there might be a little bit of a back-end glitch with sharing.
I have it done. Good at the way that it's loading. All right, we'll keep going. Let's hit the next slide.
Here we go. Mine just popped up here, Jay.
Oh, there we go. So, wow, okay. A good component here, not familiar. Some with some and some moderate familiarity, right? I thought all of us just, went to sleep at night reading the executive order. We're deep breath of knowledge here. Well, good. Well, let's get into it. Let's have a conversation around that, and we'll keep rolling. Next slide. All right, so if you're not familiar with the tasks and timelines laid out in the EO, many more qualified experts have debated the fine details, covering the intricacies, as I said, against zero trust and software build materials. S-bombs are everywhere you look, especially now with the exploitation, supply chain exploitation attacks that we've seen. But really, what we're looking for to talk today is how we see the timeline now, the implementation of guidelines for enhancing software security. So NIST recently this past February released the official version of the Secure Software Development Framework. I think we're all probably familiar if you're a secure software practitioner or an assessor or from the community with FISMA and the RMF requirements, the NIST 853 and the volumes of security controls that support. But with the SSDF, NIST is kind of breaking out from being prescriptive and really helping the community focus more on execution and the intangible implementation of the frameworks to truly create a secure software development lifecycle. That's the ultimate goal here. So you can see we're in that timeline right now where they've issued the guidance identifying best practices. NIST did that in February. So we're really towards the latter stages of the EO timeline right now. And it's critical that we all begin kind of executing really on a lot of the pieces of the puzzle here that we've known for a long time, but really kind of being forced into play with these timelines on the EO. All right, next slide. Okay, so the big topic we all like to talk about inside of the Fed space, and that's authority to operate. And whether that's just simple ATO or CATO, the continuous authority to operate, you may be familiar with both terms. A lot of folks talk interchangeably, and a lot of folks also get very, their hairs up on the back of the neck when you try to do so. It's 50-50 with the crowd. But if you've been in any of the numerous conversations and webinars around the latest ATO CATO memo that came out from Department of Defense, you probably have your own thoughts and purposes on that. But for the purpose of this conversation, we're going to keep it simple. So what has really stood out and mirrors much of the SSDF approach is that there's no single solution which fits all in the larger executive approach, right? Especially with the EO. So they're leaving the door open for using any one of the demonstrated ATO, CATO approaches, whether that's the RMF heavy approach, for traditional ATO, or kind of the forward-leaning process around, people tech embraced by, Platform One and the others for the approach for CATO. The executive order puts priority on embracing all the existing models and really driving forward what is missing in many programs, and that's kind of tangible execution. We all know what we need to be doing, but how do we really go about doing it? And that's kind of where you're seeing the application of the EO against ATO. So what you're really seeing with EO is embracing and pushing forward the support for DevSecOps and putting the policy and procedure into practice. Policy is great, right? But we really need to start executing, and that's the driving guidance behind the EO. Next slide. So what is the impact of the EO on, us as community of AppSec professionals and software devs? Really, it's a confirmation of what we already know. Software is now the front line in our national cybersecurity approach. Attacks are coming for the supply chain. That's blatantly clear. The targets are now the pipeline and sometimes individual devs themselves. We've seen a lot of that. The major challenge that we'll face is implementation of the standards and demonstration of our continual state of compliance. It's not a new challenge, but it's something we're learning as a community to do well. And with increased speed within really honing in on the SDLC and securing our software. So while the EO pushes to strengthen cybersecurity posture, the impact to us is really going to be felt in the functional implementation and demonstration of a continuous state of compliance. All right, next slide. All right, so let's get into SSDF, and we're also going to get into how we can help you implement SSDF using SD elements. But first, another poll. How familiar are you with the SSDF? So we kind of saw in our first poll here, some folks came to this not as aware of the EO or moderately aware. Let's see how close people are with the SSDF. I'm hoping a lot of you are extremely familiar. Especially given the time. Well, I guess no, February. Hasn't been out a long time here, but the draft for it has been available since around 2019. And there were some great conversations around it. All right, here we go. Slightly familiar and not so familiar. Okay. I'm not judging you. That would be wrong. We're all here to bring each other up. So let's get into it. Okay, so what is the SSDF? You may ask if you're joining us and unfamiliar, as we see with the polling. That's not a problem. Really, it's a high-level guidance on secure software development practices to really enable your organization to better secure your software development lifecycle, right? It's all about creating a secure software development lifecycle and the steps you can take to do so. If you're familiar with defense and you've worked in other organizations, defense loves models very similar to this one. Let's break it down into 4 easy steps. Let's make it simple to digest and implement. So they've broken this process out into 4 focused initiatives. The first one being preparing the organization. That's ensuring that your organizations, your people, your processes, the technology, and that stack are prepared to perform secure software development. Seems like a no-brainer, but it's really, people just go, oh, I buy all these tools because I know these tools. Let's create a pipeline. Well, how do you do that securely, right? How do you ensure that across that entire approach, you've built security in each one of the steps? So then we get into protecting the software, right? So all the components of your software, from tampering, unauthorized access, ensuring that as you build it safe from the start, it is indeed safe from the start, that nothing's built in at the beginning that may cause a supply chain issue or something further down the road. Then we get into producing well-secured software. So making sure your well-secured software has no security vulnerabilities in its release to the degree possible when anything can be secure, right? That's a debate for another time, but one that I've seen hardlines drawn. And then ultimately responding to the vulnerabilities, right? And doing this in kind of a continuous flow, which is the continuous approach to DevSecOps. So identifying those vulnerabilities in your software before the release, responding appropriately to address them, while also improving your process to keep identifying vulnerabilities from recurring, right? So if you see something that is being repeated within your process, a vulnerability that keeps rearing its head, you're not implementing lessons learned. And that's kind of what the steps inside of SDF really break out for you. So we'll keep moving along. All right, this slide looks boring, but if there's one slide you screenshot from this presentation, this is a solid contender here, right? So we see the breakout between the SSDF practices and the tasks in those sections of the executive order which they cover, right? So if you're going to do a deep dive into learning on EO compliance, this is a strong map for your efforts. This is the cheat sheet, right? So those of you who answered not overly familiar, go ahead, screen grab this one right now. I think we may also make the slides available at some point. Bookmark the timeline for this conversation to watch the replay so you can pause and dig into this. These different sections here that we highlighted in the previous slide, you can see how the PO, PS, RV, all the practices kind of align with the different sections of the EO. All right. Again, so the impact on us as AppSec pros and devs, it shouldn't be an impact, but rather an impetus to improve our team's ability to produce secure code, right? As I kind of spoke to in one of the previous slides, they've really left it open for us to embrace a number of existing frameworks that exist out there already. OWASP, a couple of others that people really lean on and use. SafeCode. I mean, you can have all of your opinions on the different flavors of approaches here, but NIST is really saying ensuring you're implementing one is really the way to go about this. So a big piece is also shifting left. It's what we're all striving to do. It's what we enable with SD elements, and the SSDF is not intending to inhibit, but rather support the implementation of secure coding and really the creation of a strong culture around secure development. So if you embrace this, all of that is going to benefit versus be impacted. And next slide. But first, another poll. All right. So I can see we've grown in size here from attendees. That's awesome. How prepared is your organization to implement the SSDF recommendations, or comply rather? Again, I have high hopes. A number of you are going to answer very well prepared. Okay. Not bad. We got some room for improvement here, for sure. We'll keep on rolling on the slides there, Maureen. All right, so how we, as SD Elements, enable your SSFDF recommendations. Okay, getting into it, with the find and fix approach that most people take, you're coding first. You're only catching vulnerabilities after you build a product and you're in that testing phase, prior to a release, right? So you're already down the life cycle long after you've pushed and you're in the build process. You're relying on SATs and DAS scanners to catch and flag, STIGs and CVEs and other vulnerabilities. You've already possibly put a number of vulnerabilities in there that you're going to have to work against to fix. And that's going to elongate your time and your life cycle to getting code out the door. So how do we do it with SD Elements? Next slide. So with SD Elements, we shift everything to the left. So essentially from the very beginning, you're in the plan and prevent phase of that DevSecOps lifecycle. You're doing everything from the very beginning to build secure software. From there, you're planning your app secure from the start. We accomplish this through kind of a quick survey process that allows you to model your app, provides you a detailed task analysis for your dev teams to follow to build it secure, to align against a lot of the myriad of controls that are out there. You have the ability to go in and select what you need to be essentially secured against 853, low, medium, high, PCI DSS. If you're out there in the commercial space, there's Joseph will have to really demonstrate this, but I think we have 127 different kind of control volumes that allow you to align against, so you can model your app early. And in doing that, essentially allows you to implement to a much better degree, because if you're the set guy in that DevSecOps process, essentially it creates a number of tasks that you can export directly to your devs into their backlog using Jira. And from there, they know how to start to build the app secure from the beginning. So really nothing is missed along the way as you align your product to the overarching timeline. So let's go ahead and continue on, Maureen, and we'll break it down a little further against the SSDF. I know we had a little bit of technical issues there with some of the visual presentations, so it looks like some of that's cleared up. All right, Joseph, my man, we are jumping into your domain. So let's talk about preparing the organization. Right now, we help with the definition security requirements for software development. We help identify and implement roles and responsibilities. We can even help prepare the organization for implementing these things. What are some of the areas that you see a main focus on with prospects and when you do the demonstrations of concern here with these initial front-end areas?
Yeah, so I would say, a lot of the times people are doing this via a very manual process if they're doing anything at all. When they have to go through and they have to kind of, decide what they're building, they oftentimes use spreadsheets, and problems with that are oftentimes there could be multiple versions of the spreadsheets that people are using, and they have to kind of manually track this. Whereas opposed to SD elements, we're going to kind of, prepare the organization by defining the security requirements up front. We're going to ask you to fill out a survey. That survey is going to be answered with, what are we building today? What is this application? How does it behave? That sort of thing. And then from there, SD Elements, it takes those answers automatically, and it's going to prescribe a group of controls or countermeasures to potential problems that it's identified. And those are really put there to protect the software. And not only are they telling you what you need to do to protect the software, right? But at the end of the day, they're also telling the developer or maybe the DevOps team member, in their specific role, exactly how it is that they need to do this as well. So that's really, what kind of helps there.
The big thing I always take away is, in PO 1.3 there as it's laid out, if you're a COTS provider or you're even building something directly for the government under contract, if that government entity or even your own entity is using SD elements, you can push this data out to the backlogs of the devs. So it's easier to manage. You're not trying to define traceability, like you said, using the spreadsheets. And you can really, I think, highlight and create a attestation of trust for an assessor at the end for ATO, kind of follow that trail and how that began.
Right, and that's a big part of what we're doing is integrating the existing tool set that you have, so that we can help automate that, and then we can bring in the artifacts into SD elements, so to speak, to be kind of that centralized version of truth. So the assessors can easily come in here and see, okay, well, here's what was assigned as part of the standard that we've set as an organization. Here's what's assigned. Here's who's done what and when, and then here's proof from my scanner or my manual verification that's actually done it correctly.
Yes, I mean, right there on that point, you just hit the PO 3.3, right? Collecting that evidence, the tools, the artifacts, all those pieces of scan components that come back into SD elements once you've run your scans for essentially integration to that larger, attestation of practice there. That's a big piece that I always talk to folks about, and it seems to see a lot of interest. So the one thing on this slide that we really didn't highlight yet, and this is that 2.2, right? Role-specific training. So a lot of people don't know that Security Compass is also a training company, and a lot of our training is available inside of SD Elements. That includes, just-in-time training snippets. So if you're a code developer and you're in your backlog task, SD Elements will push to you just-in-time training, which is something cool to highlight. And also for that role-specific training, we have a number of courses to include our Secure Software Practitioner, which is an ISC squared certification as well, available for keeping up to date with this 2.2 area. All right, next slide, Maureen. We'll keep rocking here. All right, protecting the software. So protect all forms of code from unauthorized access and tampering, right? This essentially gets rolled into a number of controls that exist out there already. Joseph, maybe talk to how these controls can be tracked and reported on.
Yeah, absolutely, Jay. So again, to talk about the task at hand are all about protecting the software. So not only say you need to do this, but this is how you do this. So it walks them through that process as well. So generally speaking, our idea here is that we're giving the developer everything that they need, or the DevOps team member, to properly implement the control that they're being asked to. So when they're asked to do this, and we're doing this in a way that is easy on them, because it all gets sent into an issue tracking like Jira or Azure DevOps or GitLab or whatever you may be using. So as they work through the guidance that they're given, and even take that role-based training that we've talked about as well, when they've completed the control, they can then go up into the issue tracker and say, hey, this is complete. I'm going to change the status to done. And when we do that, it is a bi-directional sync. So it actually goes back to SD elements as well. Again, we're integrating all the tools in the supply or in the chain here, and bringing in that artifact. So we're going to have the developer attestation from the issue tracker that this has been done. And when we run our reports at the end, we'll actually be able to see who was the developer that checked this off. When did they do it?
That's awesome. Thanks, Joseph. Next slide, Maureen. All right, producing well-secured software. I think this is one we more closely align with. Granted, we're not doing the coding, but I think we really assist the devs in how to do it securely and give great knowledge when it comes to how to meet the threshold that is all the controls that are out there. You want to talk a little bit to that as well, Joseph?
Yeah, I would just say that that's the whole point of what we're trying to accomplish here is to give you the ability to produce well-secure software by asking in a way that's consistent, and you can easily set up the standards for your particular organization and what they need to do. But essentially, when you go through that survey again, we're filling out the controls. You've got a risk policy, which I'll go into, which will set the standard and the minimum bar that you need to adhere to. At the end of the day, you've got a document here, a working document with an SE elements of what it is exactly I need to do in order to make sure that I'm producing well-secured software that is not vulnerable. So that's really what this is about, is following the process and then having the proof at the end of the day that the assessor can go to, so you can say, hey, here's what we needed to do. Here's what's been done. Here's proof from our scans that it's actually been done correctly.
Yeah, and a great note is also, the ability to do threat modeling. We have a lot of great resources on using SDLC for threat modeling, documentation, how to really create strong reports and attestation documents with the reports that we create with SDLC. And then the big thing is adhering to those secure coding best practices. It's more than just checking the box, right? It's the execution, as we spoke about in the beginning.
Right.
All right. Next slide, Maureen. Okay, responding to vulnerabilities. So here's the big thing. People think, well, you're not a scanner. I need a scanner, right? So I really would love it, Joseph. You kind of talk about, how we've integrated with scanners and how we take that data back in and the process for validating that data.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said earlier, it's not just about just accepting the developer's attestation, because you probably want more, but by most organizations would. So we do integrate in with a lot of existing scanners. Let's say your SAS and your DAS scanners, check marks, Veracode, Fortify, Web Inspect, SonarQube, etc. There's about, I think it's 10 or 12 right now that are supported out of the box. So what we do is we've taken those scanners and we've looked at each of them and the kind of the reports that they give back, and we've mapped those back to our individual task. So once the developer signs off on this and they say, hey, it's been done, you've got maybe 20 or 30 tasks that have started and completed, you can actually initiate your scans and bring in that data. And what happens at that point in time is you can either validate, yes, the scanner is saying everything's good to go and there's no problems with this, right? Which gives you that validation, that peace of mind, which will show up in your reports. Or you could say, hey, wait a second, I know the developer is attested to the fact that this is done, but maybe the scanner's coming up and saying, hey, there's 4 counts of reversible one-way hash. We need to take a look at this again. So in that case, you can actually set up SD elements to the behavior that if it receives a negative scan back, right, we're saying like, oh no, this is not good. We've got problems here, and these are what the problems are. You can set it up to where it automatically sets the status back to incomplete in SD elements. It can send it back in the developer backlog, where they can work back through it, correct what was not done correctly, at which point we can resubmit and we can rescan and check for adherence.
A big thing too, Joseph, that we talk to a lot of folks about is also, if you're trying to meet these sections of RV2, RV3, and you have an existing piece of software, you can back model an existing piece of software within SD elements. Want to talk about that just for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are not just for new software at all. So most of the organizations that use us, they use us for existing software as well. Could be maybe you're doing a cloud migration, or you're making changes, or you just kind of want to see where it stands. So the way that you go about it is very much the same, but you can fill out the survey, and then SD Elements is going to generate controls to potential problems that's identified. But you can then immediately upload your most recent scan, at which point we can bring it in. And a lot of that stuff, since it's an existing application, it's probably already going to be taken care of. So SD Elements can say, hey, check off this, and this are good. You need to take a look at these things. And that really helps you kind of understand, even from the perspective of software that may have existed for a long time, maybe what are some things that you missed that still need to be done. And with that and with the integration of the scanners, you really only have to work on what actually needs to be worked on within there.
Awesome, man. Well, I think we've kicked this one a little bit. Let's move on, Maureen. I think it's about demo time. Just a quick overview here. This kind of shows you everything that we cover. For SD Elements, we continuously maintain a repository of software threats and secure requirements. A lot of our bread and butter and secret sauce is in the content, right? And we have a dedicated content team of highly knowledgeable individuals, PhD level folks that they eat, sleep, breathe compliance and controls, and I love them for that. And we hope that you would love them too when you dive into everything we make available with SD Elements. So I have to shout out our content team because they're tremendous, but we'll keep rolling. All right.
I'm going to turn things over here to Joseph, and he's going to do a little bit of show and tell for us.
All right, absolutely. Thank you, Maureen. Go ahead and share my screen here.
Oh.
Can you stop sharing?
Yep, just a second here. It's a little sticky on me at the moment. I've lost my mouse. I'm in a spinning spiral of death with my mouse at the moment. There we go. Let's see if I can get it back here.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you. All right. So again, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Maureen and Jay, for kicking this off. My name is Joseph Rowe, and I'll be walking you through a demonstration of how SD Elements can help you comply with the SSDF. And just to kind of go through this, we're going to start with a survey, and we talked a little bit about this up front. But essentially what we're doing here is we're preparing the organization, right? We're going to just define security requirements for software development. And we're going to do this by answering questions within the survey about what is this application that we're building today? What are the technologies that we're using? What are maybe some compliance requirements such as NIST RMF or CNSSI 1253 that we need to adhere to? How is this being deployed? Now, when we finish this and we click, go ahead and continue, SD Elements is then going to take those answers and it's going to prescribe a group of controls, countermeasures, tasks, whatever you want to call them, to potential problems that we've identified that are tracking against the standard that's been put into place. And those tasks themselves are all about actually protecting the software at hand, right? What do you need to do to protect the software? And then how do you do it? Because they're developer-centric by nature and role-based by nature as well. So I guess you may have developers, you may have your DevOps engineers that are working through this when they deploy it, but they've got the guidance and everything that they need in order to properly implement this control. We're going to use your existing tool chains, right? Your tool sets. So we're going to then take those controls and we're going to push them into an issue tracking system, such as Jira or Azure DevOps, GitLab, what have you. So a developer can consume those right within their existing workflow. They can work through all of that information, the controls and the guidance that we've given them. And when they're done, it is a bi-directional sync so they can check off that it's been complete right then and there within that issue tracker. And it will send the artifacts back into SD Elements saying, hey, this person's checked this off. Here's who's done it. And here's when they did it, when they checked the reports at the end. Just to give you additional insight, we're also going to use our existing tool chains, whether that be SAS and DAS scanners, because after that developer attestation, you will probably want additional additional validation that this has been done correctly. And that's where we're going to bring in those check marks or the fortifiers or the vericodes to give you that additional peace of mind. And I'll pull all of it together at the end with the reporting and auditing functionality that SD Elements has. So real fast, who is going to fill out this survey? We generally say that it's someone that's going to be very familiar with the application at hand. You can think of a lead developer, maybe a project manager, maybe a security SME. They can probably expect to spend about 25 to 30 minutes when they first start going through this. Now, I'm going to walk through this pretty quickly because really what we want to see is what comes out as a result. But nonetheless, we will kind of show you how you gather your information and how you start on preparing the organization here. So I've told SD Elements that we're building a Java 2 web app, and as such, it's pre-answered some of these questions up front. So I can see as far as components in development, I've got a web application that we're developing today. I can go to architecture and environment and answer specifics about this. Maybe we're dealing with a microservice or an IoT for system. Maybe this contains multiple components to communicate through a network. Context and characteristics, I can answer specifics. Are we handling health data, for instance? Maybe we're consuming cloud services or providing them. On platform and language, the vast majority of our controls, they start off as being platform language agnostic, but when we answer these questions, it gives SD Elements the ability to dynamically bring in additional content that'll further help the developers. A lot of times, role-specific training, which is part of the SSDF. Also, role-specific walkthroughs. How do I actually do this? How do I implement this? What are maybe some code snippets that I can kind of take as an example. Real fast, the web technologies that we're using, right? Database technologies, are we using SQL or NoSQL database? Because this will allow us to give additional input on this. Java technologies, data formats. Features and functions, we're strictly dealing with how are we handling things like authentication and authorization, password session management, protocols that are in use, right? And then one area I do like to highlight are the compliance requirements. As we all know, as an organization, if you're a DoD or Fed, there are a lot of different compliance requirements that you could potentially have to adhere to. And a very common one is NIST 800-53 or RMF. So if this is in scope for NIST 800-53, you can select it here, select the impact level that you're tracking against. And we do have coverage for additional federal standards, like the cybersecurity framework, or CMMC with its different maturity levels, ASD STIG, CNSSI, including its overlays. So you can select those here, and be sure to bring in the scope every control that is necessary to make sure that you're adhering to the compliance and regulatory frameworks that you need to. On development test tools, we're asking what are we using to help build this? Static and dynamic analysis, maybe OWASP tools. And then another area I do like to highlight are the deployment options. So again, we're all about protecting the software. We're doing the planning up front, or plan and prepare rather than remediate and you have to do all this stuff at the end. But we're asking you, how are you deploying this? Are you deploying it maybe to a cloud provider like AWS or Azure? And if you are, you can come in here and select the specific service. You can select the services that you're using within that, whether that be EC2 or Lambda or Route 53. And again, SDLC is going to provide you with the guidance on how to protect the software so that we're doing it right in the first time. Now, as I finish this up, I will simply come over here. We're going to hit save and continue. And before SDLC kind of takes those answers and it puts it through its rules engine, it's asking me to select a risk policy for this project. Now, think of this as setting a minimum bar that an application needs to clear in order for this to be considered compliant. And ultimately, risk policies allow an organization to define a security baseline by determining what needs to be brought into scope. You as an organization have the ability to get very granular with these, but for this point in time, I'm going to set this up and say that we are only going to bring in the scope for this particular project at this point in time. Only those tasks or controls needed to satisfy NIST RMF. And again, it could be NIST RMF or a combination of other standards. You have very granular control over this. But we would like to save and continue. So here in a moment, we're going to be brought to a list of controls or countermeasures or tasks that have been created or prescribed based upon potential problems that SDLC has identified from the survey answers that are tracking against the standard that's been put into place. In this case, we're dealing with NIST RMF. Now, again, these tasks are all about protecting the software. And not only are they telling you what you need to do, right? Because it's like, okay, well, you need to do this, but that's not very helpful if the developers don't understand how they actually need to go about doing so. So not only do we providing with what you need to do, but we're actually going to walk the developer or the DevOps team member or the engineers through it step by step to ensure that they know exactly how to do it. So just to level set you here, we've got the controls, and they are ranked on a priority scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest risk, 1 being the lowest. That's based off the common weakness scoring system by MITRE. Over here, we've got the status as it is from SDLC. Is it currently complete? Maybe it's risk accepted. Maybe it's not. It's incomplete. Maybe it's not applicable. So again, this is all about being developer centric and enabling them in a way that helps them to properly implement the controls so that it's done right in the first place. So let's take a look at one of these from the perspective of a developer. And let's say I'm a developer and I've been assigned this task, and we're going to use something universal here. But let's say it's ensure all data in transit is encrypted using secure TLS channel. And again, this task is about protecting the software. First things first, I've got the problem written out very easy in plain English and easy for me to understand. But it gives me a good understanding of why it's important. And it also gives me a good understanding of why I should be doing this. As we go on further, I've got the common weakness enumeration database where I can click through, learn more about the problem, learn ways to mitigate it. But again, not only is this a problem, this is why you should do it, but how do we actually do that? And here I've got the solution written out for you step by step. Okay. How do we actually accomplish this? For instance, of course, do not support SSL, provide support for TLS, reduces sugar ciphers, et cetera, et cetera. Additional and guidance on how I enforce this on all pages, again, protecting the software. Further guidance on the choice of cipher that I should be making, with examples here given from OWASP recommendations again, so we know how to properly protect the software. And then down here at the bottom, I've got a couple of additional items that were brought in here dynamically, because again, these are not static. Based upon input from the survey, additional content is brought in and out. And I've got PCI DSS requirements here, since that was the scope for that. And then we've also got an additional section here on Lambda, since I said we were using this for AWS. So what's more, let's say at this point in time, maybe the developer, your engineer, whoever's role is handling this, has kind of worked through this, and they can still use a little bit more help. Well, down at the bottom, we do have additional content on pretty much every one of our controls to further assist the people in actually implementing this correctly, including what we refer to as just-in-time training courses. And these courses are role-based, and they are specific to the task at hand, and they are highly targeted, 5 to 10 minutes in length. The developer can take them really quickly, open them up, take the class, learn about it. At which point, once they take the class, they oftentimes have a quiz to check their understanding. They can take that. They can then take what they've learned right then and there in this role-based training and implement it immediately. And we believe this is beneficial to them as opposed to what they normally see, which is usually security training maybe once or twice a year, or it could be weeks or months before they have to use that. In addition, the vast majority of the controls also include how-tos, and these are walkthroughs, and these are specific to the technologies that we noted that we were using within the survey itself. So again, role-based kind of walkthroughs. There's a code snippet in Java. How do I enable encrypted connection to a database engine? Again, it'll walk you through that process. And we got the example in MySQL because that's what we selected within the survey. So again, very specific at hand. This is all about protecting the software. And at the end of the day, it's about producing well-secured software as well. This, however, is all within SD elements. And we talked about how, as a part of another part of the SSDF, we want to integrate the existing tool sets that you have. And really, one of the major integrations that we do have is the issue tracker integrations. So I've taken this control and we've done the JIRA integration, and we've sent that same control over to a JIRA backlog, and the developer gets all that same information, right? The walkthrough, how do I accomplish this? How do I enforce this on all pages? What's my choice of cipher? And then now at the bottom, they still have access to the walkthroughs, right? The code snippet. And even those just-in-time training courses, those role-based trainings that are important to the SSDF, are available right here within the issue tracker. They can take the classes, they work through this. As they complete it, they simply come over here, check off that it's been done. Again, this is a bi-directional sync, so we will have the traceability back into who did what and when we run our reports at the end. All right, so at this point in time, we put out the survey. SD Elements has generated the controls, right, setting the standard that's been put into place. We've sent them off into an issue tracking system like Jira or GitLab or Azure DevOps. Maybe your developers have started to work through them at this point in time, and you're probably going to want some additional validation that this has actually been done correctly. And that's where your scanners are going to come into play. Again, working in with another one of your tool sets, we're bringing in, not only are we sending this stuff over to the issue tracker, but we're also pulling in the validation from your scanning tools as well. So I don't know if you've noticed, but over here on the right side, we have a bunch of colored flags next to pretty much most of these controls. And a colored flag indicates that we have some sort of a result back from it. And if I click back through it, you can actually see that we've got results from several different scanners. And we've got a red flag because at least 2 or more of those found a problem. And if I click through to it, I can see exactly what it found. So again, it found 4 counts of weak encryption, 2 counts of weak cryptographic hash. And at the end of the day, let's say maybe your developer had signed off on this, but yet you've run scans and you've got obvious problems here. Well, to help with the automation and to help with the integration of the tool chain here, we can actually set up SD elements to the behavior that when it receives its results, it can automatically change the status back to incomplete, send it back in the developer backlog, have them work back through it, fix what they missed, at which point they can resubmit, we can rescan and check for adherence. Now, again, this is part of the SSDF where you have the ability to proactively respond to vulnerabilities. And you don't have to wait for some outside organization or reporting functionality to let you know that there's problems here. we're doing it automatically for you. We're automatically bringing in the results. We got the developer attestation that we can compare the two and then make changes and updates as necessary. Ideally, though, the idea behind SD elements is that if this is being done correctly, then at the end of the day, for developers, they work through this and they, implement the control as advised, then you should be seeing most of these as being green flags, which of course means green says the scanner is good to go. We have confidence in that result. And at the end of the day, we're also going to have a developer attestation, and both of these artifacts are going to be pulled together into a singular report that we can run at any time in real time in a matter of seconds with SD elements. And that's what I'm going to get to next. So let's say this application, this project, it's been going on for a while. You've got developers that have signed off on this. You've run scans maybe a couple of times to kind of get insights into where you're sitting. You're probably going to want to get a report that you can run in real time to get an overarching view of where your application sits. And there are a number of different reports that you can run out of the box. 5 total. They give you varied insights. The one that I like to show the most is what often comes up for our federal clients is the most important, and that's a compliance report. So within SD elements, there are around 70 regulatory or compliance frameworks that are mapped right now. And we can select from any of the ones that we have mappings for. So let's say, for example, we want to go with the NIST 800-53 Red 5. I can click download. And in a matter of seconds, I'm going to get a snapshot of where my application sits in regards to the standard that I've run right here. And it's actually going to break it down section by section of NIST or whatever standard I have at CNSSI and show me what's been assigned to satisfy each of these sections, who's done what and when, and what does my scan or my manual verification have to say. As we scroll down through this, you'll see that we've started with AC1 and AC2, but we don't have anything in scope for those. But once we do get to AC2.1, we do have several tasks that are in scope. And we've done this on a phased approach. So we've got 1 task in scope from the architecture and design phase, 2 from the testing phase, 1 from deployment, and a couple from activities. And then we got several that are not in scope for this particular project. And not only, so we're saying that all of these ones that are in scope, these are what need to be done to satisfy this section of NIST 800-53. But not only do we have what needs to be done, we've got the information on them as well. This one's a priority 7. Its status is incomplete from SD elements. It was last modified by SD elements support, which is myself. It was last modified way back on December the 2nd. It's a partial pass from our scanning tool. And this is last to either initiated the scan or did the manual override on this. And again, we get this section by section. And we also have down here at the bottom, what's not in scope. And you may be asking yourself, well, what is this? So generally we're stating that these controls right here, these could be in scope for this section of NIST, but they're not in scope for this particular project because of either what the application is, how it behaves, or what it does. So we leave these here as a checkpoint for you because you might take a look at this and say, oh, wait a second, we're doing this. I need to go back, take a look at my survey, find out what I missed, at which point I can correct it, resubmit it, and we can get a better viewpoint on a more accurate viewpoint, if you will. Now, for a lot of organizations, this has been a very big deal for them because you've got the spreadsheet out right now, and you can run your report daily, weekly, monthly, hourly if you choose to, and you get the insights into where this stands. So maybe you make some adjustments with this because everyone's a little bit different. Maybe you sit down with your assessor and they're like, oh, we want to make a few tweaks to this report. And that's very easily done through templates. At which point you can go to the assessor when this has been done and say, hey, look, Mr. and Mrs. Assessor, here's the standard that we agreed upon. Here's what was assigned as a result of that. And here's who's done what. Here's proof from our scanners. And that's how we help a lot of organizations to actually achieve, in some cases, a continuous ATO or more rapid ATO. And that's how this whole process is all about enabling the SSDF as well and creating, well-produced software or well-secure software as well. So that's really all I have for the demonstration at this point in time. I appreciate everyone for taking the time, but I will send this back over to Maureen and Jay at this point in time.
Sounds great. Once the ball gets passed over to me, I'll reshare and we'll start wrapping things up.
There you go.
Just taking a bit. Here we go.
Great job as always, Joseph.
Yes, thanks for the great demo. And Jay, I'm going to turn it over to you for some final recommendations.
Awesome. All right, so what else can you do, right? The big thing is get involved in the community if you're not already. So there's a lot of opportunities within NIST to do that. Just jump in there, CSRC, go check out what's happening there. As you do your deep dive, your late reading tonight of the SSDF, you'll see there's also a lot of other prescribed, essentially, frameworks that they call out in there as well, as like OAuth, SafeCode, OpenSAM, etc. You can further down the rabbit hole and get involved with those communities as well if you're not. Inside of the federal space, and more specifically the DoD, the DoD DevSecOps Community of Practice is a tremendous resource, one that I benefit from tremendously all the time, and I'm sure that you will too. So you can check out software.af.mil, go to DSOP, and check out the COP. They put on a monthly webinar, and they have covered in depth a lot of the aspects of SSDF and the executive order to include zero trust and SBOMs. So great resource. Go watch the replays. If you haven't already, I also recommend you check out resources.securitycompass.com. We have a large width and breadth of resources available to you there on our site as well, covering everything from threat modeling with SD elements to other demos with Joseph and members of our team, and deep white paper dives into compliance and standards when it comes to secure software and AppSec. Also, we also have a great community engagement team through Altaz and a number of the other folks in our company who do a lot, both in other webinars as well as our podcast. If you're interested in training and you're looking at secure software developments, may I recommend our Software Security Practitioner Suite, SSP. You can find that on our site as well. It's an ISE squared certification course. Easy to accomplish. Well, I won't say easy to accomplish, but it's easy to access and it's rarely available for you. Get out there and get after it. And if you're looking to figure out how else you can shift left, right? And the demo here, maybe just wetted your whistle, book some time with our team. We'll do a one-on-one with you. Joseph will jump in and we can really talk about how you can implement SD elements to really shift left and build your compliance and your secure software development lifecycle.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jay. And we're going to go ahead and open it up for some Q&A. We've had a few questions come in during the course of the presentation that we'll kick things off with. But before we do that, I think we have our final poll that we're going to put up. So take a minute to answer the question there, and I'll start going through some of the questions that have entered into the queue. So the first question is, how long has Security Compass been active in the U.S. government space?
Yeah, so I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, but I think it's been 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah, it's easy. 5 years.
And another question coming in, and Jay, you may have answered this maybe a little later on in the presentation, but the question is around how Security Compass or SD Element stays current with changes in NIST standards and new NIST standards like 218 or 253.
Sure. So, we like to be at the bleeding edge of a lot of that coming out. So as I spoke to, a number of our team were involved in those organizations, the working groups and open groups, and actively participate in, feedback with the definition of all those requirements, as well as our content team. They are tremendous at absorbing and seeing what's coming out on the time horizon for new releases and staying ahead of the curve when it comes to that, and then mapping those into our existing control structures in the product.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joseph.
No, I was just going to add it on. For example, I know that back in 2021, NIST 800-53 Rev 5 was coming out, and it was going to be required, for use in a lot of the federal agencies back in September of 2021. Well, we actually had Rev 5 updated within SD Elements in February of 2021, so we were way out in front of it. So we do strive to stay on top of this stuff as necessary.
Great, thanks, Joseph. Another question, maybe more on the techie side. What platforms for installation does SD Elements currently support?
Well, so platforms for installation. So right now we have a couple of different deployment options that we obviously do offer SaaS, but usually within our federal government and DoD, they're usually wanting our containerized version, which is Kubernetes. But we have been approved for the RM Bank, so it is available there. It's also available directly through us. And then we do also open, or have in the meantime, an open virtual appliance that can be deployed as well within your infrastructure.
Okay, and then just I think about two more questions before we wrap things up. The first one is around, who specifically on the teams are the kind of day-to-day users of SD elements within government agencies?
So I would say that the developers don't, they get the outputs from SD elements, but they're usually not interacting directly with the platform. Usually the people that are interacting directly with the platform are either like security SMEs, or it could be the assessors who are getting the reports, the back end. Those are going to be our more common kind of people that are interacting with us on a daily basis. Jay, do you have anything to add?
No, it's definitely we see kind of a 50-50 mix between the assessors and security SMEs. It really helps with getting out of the way of the devs, honestly. Yeah.
And you mentioned assessors. Another question was, what kind of proof will assessors be looking for when they're trying to verify that, the organization is, kind of following the letters of the EO and is compliant with the secure software development framework?
Yeah, so I would say you saw how the reports work, and like I said, everyone's a little bit different in kind of the individual assessors on proof that they're requiring. But for a lot of the organizations that we've worked with, the developer attestation with the day that they did it, on top of either the manual verification maybe that you can do through a QA testing, or the automated testing that you can do with the SAS and DAS tools, has been good enough for a lot of them. And in some cases, maybe within the Fed and the DoD, they need to kind of spool that report into another source of truth. Like I know a lot of you are probably going to be familiar with Exacta or EMAS, and there's ways to do that. We're working on a more formal integrations to automatically do that, but we've got a CSV export for the reports that can then be with some scripting fed into either of those systems as a source of truth that needs to be done as well.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's it. There's a few other questions, but I think we've already answered them via other comments that we've made. So we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Also, thank you very much, Jay, for giving us an overview of the executive order and its timelines and SSDF recommendations and how the EO and SSDF is going to impact application security and development teams. And thanks to you as well, Joseph, for the demo and sharing how SD Elements can help teams comply with those key EO requirements and SSDF recommendations. And in terms of next steps, if you're interested in learning more about the executive order, the SSDF, how Security Compass can help, please don't hesitate to reach out either now via the chat box or after the webinar and ask one of our Security Compass Fed DoD experts to contact you. They'd be happy to chat with you more. In addition, you can also learn more about SD Elements in the US federal government and DoD by visiting our website. We've got a lot of resources there that cover topics around ATO. We've got some ATO explainer videos. We've got some case studies from several of our Fed DoD customers. In addition, as well as a high-level description of how SD Elements helps organizations comply, again, not only with the executive order and SSDF, but also with many of those other standards that Joseph referenced earlier, such as NIST RMF, 853, FedRAMP, CNSSI, CMMC, etc. So with that, I'd just like to extend our thanks and gratitude to the attendees who joined us today to learn more about the EO and SSDF. And many thanks to Jay and Joseph again for sharing their expertise. And this concludes our webinar.